My older brother, when we were still living in New York, fell down a flight of stairs and hit his head on a concrete wall in our apartment building. So who knows that he might not have suffered at that time what we now call a TBI.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? He ended up being taken out of school because his concentration level was just so poor. And my dad didn't have the skill set to deal with these problems. And I remember my older brother George staying and taking care of my younger brother Larry while I was going to school. So when George got really mentally ill and was in the Vermont State Hospital, I went to visit him there, and that was such a wonderful place for him to be because he felt safe. And he said to me, I have a little job. He said, I do some dishes and I get a little bit of money and I go to downtown. This was in Waterbury, Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a garden, and I have a friend that I meet for coffee. And then the Vermont State Hospital closed. And they did the placing of people out into the community, which for some might have been a good thing. And unfortunately for my brother, wasn't. He was really felt very safe and functional at the same time at the Vermont State Hospital. So my memory of him becomes sad because he just got more and more sick, and ended up coming and showing up in 1983 at our apartment in Rutland and moved in with us. So he at that time really wasn't doing anything. He had really started to show the effects of these psychotropic drugs that they're on, and he was also a heavy smoker. So I knew that he was in Rutland. My mom went into the nursing home and then died, and he was under the auspices of Rutland Mental Health, and I felt that he should know that his mom died and that I would love to have him come to the memorial service. And so Rutland Mental Health case manager went and told him. He ended up coming to the funeral home to view my mom, and she had rosary beads around her hands, and he said, would it be okay for me to have those rosary beads? I said, absolutely, you can have those. And when I went to clean out his apartment after his death, he had those rosary beads hanging on his wall. So I had those put in the casket with him to continue the cycle. And I actually am in the process right now of looking for a box that I've misplaced that had my mother's rosary, another set of rosary beads, and also her Bible, which was from the 1940s. And I can't find it, and I'm very distressed about it because there were a lot of old cards, holy cards and stuff in it. But I came across some letters recently from my brother and my parents back in the 60s and 70s. And reading them and reading what my brother had to say and how well he did with his handwriting and his English, considering that he didn't really have a lot of schooling, made me feel very proud of him. But then that sense of sadness kind of comes back up again. So I have, despite the fact that he didn't really stay in touch with me, I still really love him very much, and was very sad when I saw how he lived in an apartment with no television or a lot of stimulation. But it's my understanding that paranoid schizophrenics have a problem with televisions, that they may be hearing voices or think that something's going to come out of the screen or something like this. But his apartment was very sparse, and you went into his kitchen, and it was definitely a food shelf kitchen. And So I felt a tremendous amount of sadness at the loneliness that he must have been going through after my mother died, and he didn't have anybody to go visit because he'd go to her apartment and he'd watch the Yankees baseball game. She would cook a meal and they would eat together. They would go downtown grocery shopping together. And he was a big help to her because he'd carry the bags and stuff like that. And for some reason, he blamed me for the fact that she had to go into assisted living first. And I never understood that. And when she went into the nursing home, he never went to visit her. So I think that in a way he knew that he couldn't really get much out of her anymore. And I don't mean to say that in a bad way, but he really became dependent on her for meals and some socialization and stuff like that. So I think that it was a sense of trauma for him when my mom went into the nursing home. But he did come to the wake. He did come to the graveside, and he saw the gravestone, which will have my mother and the 3 kids were all engraved on there. And he knew at that time, because he didn't know this before, that when he died, he would be with his brother, my mom, and his sister. And so that made me, he was so proud, and that made me feel very happy. And we had just a little get-together at a friend's house after, and we just had some grinders and soda and beverages. And he came up to the hostess, my friend Nancy, and said, I've lost like a lot of weight, and I was wondering if you have any cottage cheese with fruit in it, because I can't eat the food that you're serving. And of course, weight with people that are on psychotropic drugs is always an issue. You're always going up and down, up and down, up and down. And he lasted at this get-together for about 20 minutes, and we had to bring him home because I think he felt really out of place. But it was so nice when I walked into the funeral home and saw him sitting there. I was so happy that he came.